let's keep it real though. That's probably why they tried to rebrand as graphic novels, so that people without actual senses of humor could enjoy them more.
Wow.
What's up, everybody? My name is Michael Stephenson. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You are currently watching my art/entertainment industry series, in which I talk about things happening specifically in film, television, with a little bit of music and publishing sprinkled in there. So, I also would ask, this is my little opening spiel. I would ask that you please go back and, if this is your first time, please go back and view some of my previous videos. I'm trying to do these videos in a particular order, sequence, so that in my earlier videos, I established a particular language or lingo for the channel, so that you would know and understand what I mean when I say avatar error, or when I say, I don't know, other stuff. Sorry, I got distracted because there's an ant crawling on my light, and I don't know where we are getting these ants or how we're getting them in. Anyway, please go back and view those original videos. So tonight I wanted to focus in on Marvel yet again. If you have been watching or following along in my videos, you would know that I am currently in a Marvel month, so to speak. I know that there are tons of channels that talk about Marvel and all things comic books, all things comic book movies, nonstop, essentially, incessantly. And they get lots of views and all that stuff. But I didn't want to necessarily just always be talking about Marvel all the time. And since this is 2024, and Marvel is only going to be having roughly one or maybe two, I think it's just one though, film that's actually part of the MCU that will be releasing this year, that is Deadpool and Wolverine, I decided to sort of have just a month or two in which I talk about all things Marvel. So I also, however, because it's the beginning of April, I also wanted to do sort of a week in which we focus in on comedy and we talk about the state of comedy right now. So I'm going to mix the two, and this is what we get: Marvel comedy. Oh, where do I begin on this one? So first off, I have not done my grounded, dark, gritty, realistic video yet, in which I talk about how pretty much everything seems as if it needs to be one of those four things: make it dark, make it grounded, make it gritty, make it realistic. We've heard that crap so much, that those specific words, that specific kind of language, for the better part of, honestly, I would kind of say all the way back to, and I hate to put this on him because I love me some Christopher Nolan, but I feel like we've kind of been hearing that same sort of language back to Batman Begins, if I'm being honest with you. So almost 2 decades. But with that said, but also have to acknowledge that there is a secondary side to that, and that is the sort of non grounded, non gritty, non realistic, or maybe it is actually more realistic. I don't really know, thinking about it now, side and way of storytelling. And that happens to, weirdly enough, involve comedy. So let's get one thing straight. We all know at this point that Marvel's state of comedy is, uh, in one word, I guess I could say terrible. Now, let me be clear. I've already stated I would love to work for Marvel. I would love to work with Marvel. I would love to play Kang the Conqueror. I really want an audition for that role. I'm a writer, but I'm also an actor. So I would love to audition for that role. So I'm trying to be both critical, take a critical analysis of this, while also being a little bit more gentler with the whole criticism. But golly, is the comedy just, it's terrible. I just, we have we I just don't even know where to start with it. I really don't. I guess we first start with the level or the kind of comedy that we're seeing. So in the previous Marvel films, whether it's Incredible Hulk, the Marvel film that everybody sort of kind of forgets about, except for like the biggest, the most fanboy and fangirly of the fanboy and fangirly. Pretty much everybody else doesn't even count that as being part of the MCU. Now, I guess we'll count it as being part of the MCU a little bit more when Liv Tyler and what's his face, the dude who's going to play the leader, I guess when they return. But until then, whether it was that movie, the first two Iron Man, or even Captain America, Thor, the Avengers, the, the Marvel's relationship with comedy seemed to have sort of it seemed to have been forever either evolving or devolving or just changing, transforming from project to project. And no, it wasn't even just from one particular character to the next. You could say that the first Iron Man film was far less comical than Iron Man 3, or even tried to be far less comical than Iron Man 3. Don't get me wrong, Iron Man slash Tony Stark, the way that Robert Downey Jr. played him, he was always an incredibly sardonic, incredibly sarcastic character. Someone who was flippant as a billionaire, right? Someone who you always knew that he was, he sort of took almost everything as a joke in and of itself, to where it was like, in some ways, it felt very much so like he was too rich to really care and to really give a dang about not only whatever was happening, but also about other people's opinions about how he felt or how he expressed himself within this world. So that came off incredibly well throughout all three films. But if you rewatch that third Iron Man, it felt, in my opinion, one of the things that felt off about it was that it had far more humorous sort of takes to it that didn't seem like they fit the they just didn't seem like they fit. It wasn't even the mode of the character or even the tone of the film. They just didn't seem like they fit in very well in any form. Like I just don't even know what else to say. Oh man, just the fact that the kid was just, I get it, the kid was supposed to be annoying and all this stuff, and I don't know, just the whole film, it just wasn't, it just wasn't, but you go from that to each one of the films has had their own wrestle or their own tussling with humor and how to use it and where to use it. It almost, in a sense, feels very much so like not just the writers, but specifically the directors don't really. In many ways, it feels like the directors themselves don't have a good hold on humor and what it should be. Like, and when I think about the majority of the directors that they get for these films, I'm often reminded that, well, maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong on that. It just feels like the directors that they get for a lot of these films don't really do comedy or aren't incredibly familiar with comedy. In each genre, you can think that, a director is a director, so they can just direct anything. But no, not really. Each genre has its own specialty, or its own specialness, and thusly it has its own special ways of approaching it that work and that don't work. And from what I've seen, it feels very much so like the directors that they get are not, they're just not comedy directors. Sure, they can be good directors of action, but good directors of comedy, I just don't see it. I don't. That's, I guess, in some ways why it's so weird to me that the Russo brothers, Ohio natives, go Ohio, they actually did come from a comedy background, but they directed some of the most serious films within the entire MCU. Captain America Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, and of course Infinity War, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame. That's weird. This is very strange. Yeah, I just don't know. So let's I guess sort of dive into some of the specifics about the comedy. So first off, some of the comedy that they've used, let's keep it real. The nature of it is incredibly childish. God, I just don't know. I'm often sort of reminded when I think of certain things, like the whole, man, what was it? The when Thor's in Thor Ragnarok, and there's that opening scene in which he's tied up and he's just sort of twisting around, and it's just like, this is really kind of stupid. This is really kind of stupid. that they're playing this for humor. Now, don't get me wrong, it's actually some comedy that really works, but it's very dumb and it just feels sort of childish. Like, I just don't know, the humor in Thor Ragnarok, a lot of it seems to work, but then they try to replicate that same kind of humor in Thor Love and Thunder, and oh boy, did it not work. Like, it worked in Ragnarok, but then it just fell so flat in Love and Thunder to where it's just like, oh man, it was almost an excruciating watch, to be honest with you. And I've seen the movie twice, both on Disney Plus. I don't see Marvel movies in the theaters anymore unless I get employed by Marvel. Then I'll start watching them in theaters again. But golly, it's so Thor: Love and Thunder. It felt like they were trying to take, for instance, that scene in which, he's turning and it's supposed to be this funny thing because the dude's trying to talk to him and he's like, yeah, hold on. It's almost like putting somebody on hold. It honestly reminds me exactly of that Star Wars The Last Jedi scene at the very beginning of that film, in which Poe, I believe his character's name was, Oscar Isaac. His character, he was talking to General, I don't know, whatever his name was. Like, I don't even remember the dude's name. I don't even remember the actor's name either. I know he's British, but he's talking to him over the sort of intercoms or whatever telecommunication thing that they have between the different ships. And he's like putting them on hold. And I think he even slips in a "your mama" joke. It's like, you're talking to the Imperial Force or whatever they're calling themselves. This is dumb. Like, it's just so cringeworthy to where it just leaves you breathless and just sort of mouth agaping, just like, did they really just do that and put that into this movie? And they did. Oh God, the screaming goats in Love and Thunder, it was funny the first maybe 2 times. It was funny the first time for sure. The second time, it was like, okay, yeah, I can get a laugh out of that. By the time you hit like the third or fourth or even fifth time, it's just like, okay, come on, stop it. What are you doing? You're running a joke into the ground. And that is almost exactly what children tend to do often, is that once they get something that they think is funny, they will run it into the ground until it becomes annoying, not only to their parents, because we parents are easily ignored. We as adults are easily ignored in general. Parents are even more easily ignored, even though they are supposed to be more patient. But once they get a good joke or something, or a good song or whatever it is, they run it into the ground, and it also becomes annoying to almost everybody around them, even people who are their own age. And I just feel like that's some of the humor that Marvel has. They have currently jokes that are just, they can be funny like once, maybe twice, but Marvel will try to have the same joke over and over and over again in the same movie. And it's just like, oh my God, could y'all please, for the love of God, do something else? Another one that I'm reminded of recently, in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And I didn't, some people said that they really liked the movie. I didn't particularly think that it was all that great. Again, I think that the humor and almost everything, honestly, almost everything about Volume 1, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, felt so weirdly perfect. It was something that we were not really expecting. There, a lot of comic book nerds were coming out and saying like, "Oh, Guardians of the Galaxy, that's such it's such a strange and interesting choice for them to do." But they were like, "Well, there is that connection between Thanos and Gamora, so it sort of makes sense since they'd already hinted at Thanos in the Avengers." But they still found it to be an odd choice for the studio to go with. But they're like, okay, open mind, go into this thing, no real expectations. Let's just see if it's a good movie. And it was. But after that, the next 2 films, in my opinion, they very much so felt they were trying to replicate that humor. And I just didn't feel it. I didn't feel it the next 2 times. Drax kind of got on my nerves. And one of the specific scenes in Volume 3 was the couch scene. I mean, come on, they're on this planet, they're in these animal people's home, and he's trying to lay down on the couch, and they're like screaming and yelling at him. It felt instead of funny, and it was sort of funny the first time. I would say only sort of funny the first time because I really kind of didn't think the joke was landing almost at all, at least not with me. But then the second time and a third time, and I think they did it. They tried to do it like 4 or 5 times. And I was just like, nah, man. Not only was it not funny, but it felt like a waste of time, and especially in a movie which wasn't that almost 3 hours? It was like 2.5 hours or something, like over that, right? In a movie that long, why waste so much runtime on this joke that is you're beating the joke to death? You're beating it to death, and I'm like, that not only is it a stupid joke, it's not really a well written little setup, but it's just so. It was just so. We could talk all day about how childish some of the jokes are. I think the bigger or another big issue, and this of course gets discussed all across the internet as well, is that of the timing of the jokes. So look, comedy in and of itself. So first off, I probably should have backed up and said this. I say this in another video, so this is kind of a video that's, I guess, out of order in some ways. But I say this in another video. So for a few years, high school through college, a little bit after college, I tried stand-up comedy. And look, comedy of any kind is hard to do, but you have to understand that you can't just have a funny joke. Jokes, like you can, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. The way that you write a joke, the way that you set something up, the way that that you build all this stuff into a joke, it can be and can just come off as being funny. Like the setup in and of itself is hysterical. But that takes a whole lot of skill to do that just in and of itself. So like if you see, or excuse me, if you go and you purchase a novel and the novel is super funny, we all know, or at least we should all know at this point, how difficult it is to get across certain types and levels of humor on the internet. And the reason why is because a lot of the times that humor is written in like comment sections and things of that nature, right? It's quite difficult to write humor. So when you can do it, and I think I can do humor fairly well, depending on what it is that I'm writing. But when you can do it, it comes off as just like, wow, that was super funny. That person is really funny. However, comedy performed almost always is about, more than anything, it's not necessarily about the content of the joke, but about the timing. Comedy is almost all timing. So you can do or say something that's not even funny, but because it's timed so well, so perfectly, it can make people just hysterical, falling over with laughter. Marvel's comedy, their attempts at comedy are so poorly timed. I just don't even like. They are so poorly timed that it is almost infuriating to think about. We all know that they put far too much comedy into those serious moments. So a character or characters, they could be fighting and really be trying to go at each other, and one will stop to put in a one-line zinger or whatnot. And it's supposed to be like, oh, that's so hilarious, blah, blah, blah. And it almost never comes off as that to us as the audience. One of the big things that I think of, or one of the examples that I'm reminded of rather, is that scene in Captain America Civil War in which they finally have the airport battle. And it truly is big time Civil War. We fighting, yeah, we fighting kind of a thing. And they have that scene, and they had that little micro scene in which Clint.
Y'all, I might jump out of a window because my technology is just failing me, and I just don't know what to do. So, anyways, the scene got cut that I was doing. And what I was saying is that y'all know the airport scene in the fight where Clint and Black Widow, they're fighting, and he has her like on the ground, and he's like, yeah, you're still coming for dinner or whatnot. And she's like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. That cuts the tension. But what I was saying is that the Russo brothers, I guess because they have such a good mastery of comedy, they were able to rebuild the tension through the scene. So they somehow, you go through that scene and you get to that point, but then you also have, like, I think a few minutes later or even a few seconds later, you have, what is it, Vision dropping cars on Iron Man. And then you think to yourself, oh, now wait a minute now, that's really serious. So the tension, it eases the tension, but the tension is rebuilt once again. Okay, so that's where we are.
And so I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that they but I think that the comedy oftentimes comes too late into the scene. So there's tension built all the way through the scene, and then the comedy comes near the end of the scene, which cuts the tension and then cuts the end of the seriousness of the scene. And as I said, comedy, especially performative comedy, is oftentimes all about timing. So you have to get the right place to put the joke. Again, it's not necessarily that they shouldn't have a joke in there per se. Although, I think every scene is a case by case basis in and of itself. But I think it more importantly is where exactly in the scene you should put the joke that is more of an issue here with Marvel. But then you also have to realize too that one-liners, which is what they oftentimes try to do, one-liners and zingers and things of that nature, are by their very definition harder to do because there is no setup. Like there is no setup to the joke. Most jokes, and see, this is another thing because I feel like a lot of their comedy almost feels in some way like it's a knock joke kind of a platform sort of thing, to where it's supposed to essentially stand alone on its own thing. Like, I don't know how else to explain that. There's some comedy is setup comedy, and then other comedy is just like, it almost immediately. There's very little payoff, and it's just boom, it's just funny. And that's what one-liners are supposed to be, to where somebody can just say something really funny, no one has to reply, there doesn't even have to be a setup or a sight gag or anything like that. It's just funny. I think that a lot of what they're trying to do is the one-liner zinger sort of thing, to where this thing, whether it's a sound effect, cue the bleeding goats, or whether it's some sort of sight gag of in Thor: Love and Thunder, where Thor is constantly trying to bend. It's at the very beginning of the film when he's still with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's trying to sort of put himself into the frame when Star-Lord is talking about the people that you love and the most, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. That was sort of kind of worked, but then it's like, okay, how well did it work? Did it work as well as we thought that it would, or thought that it could or should, etc., etc.? There are all of these sorts of things that Marvel is trying to do, and I just think that it's not necessarily, well, again, it is sort of some of the actual quality of the comedy is just too childish, but a lot of it just seems to be on timing. All of the timing is so very off for a lot of this comedic stuff, and it also feels like, again, they don't know when to let a good joke just sit and be good without trying to add to it. That's another thing in comedy, is that sometimes more is more, but sometimes less is more too. Weirdly enough, more is more happens somewhere around 60 to 70% of the time. But I think it's just that Marvel keeps getting into that other last 30 to 35 or even 40%, to where, yeah, you could have this was a good enough joke to just let it sit on its own that one time, or maybe twice, if you want to have some sort of resonance point built with or in or around it. But then on top of that, I think you also have to, as I do often, you have to go back and look at us, look at we as the consumer, our expectations, and I guess in some ways readjust our own expectations of what we're thinking and feeling about these things. So and this will probably be the last sort of point that I try to make, because again, there's so much that has been said about Marvel comedy that was kind of difficult for me to pinpoint exactly what I wanted to talk about here. But we all know that they're called comic books, okay? So we as fans cannot and should not forget the fact that the very nature of them, they are supposed to contain a certain level of comedy, of comic lightheartedness within them. So yes, I get and understand that because Marvel has so often been kind of bad at putting comedy into stuff, that there are some fans who say, oh, they just shouldn't do comedy at all anymore. I'm like, that that doesn't make sense. Yeah, I'm sorry, but it doesn't align well with anything. It doesn't quite jive with what exactly is a comic book movie. So I feel like, yes, we can certainly say that they should tone it down a little bit, that they should tone down the humor in some of the films, but also we can set our expectations in a way that allows for them to still do some explorative things. And so I always get to the whole Deadpool situation. Now, full honesty here, I don't particularly like Deadpool all that much. Um, See, here's the thing. I don't really. Deadpool has so oftentimes been associated more than anything with the X-Men in the comic books and on screen. And I don't know. I don't, I maybe used to like the X-Men like a lot, but if I did, I can't remember that time in my life. I don't particularly care for the X-Men at all. Maybe it is a race thing. I'm tired of these terrible analogies of how they'll use basically anything and everything to make some sort of racial allegory or analogy, and I'm just really tired of it. To where it's like, oh, you treat these mutants like you treated black people or like you treated other races. I'm really tired of it. But then Deadpool, for whatever reason, he's never really been that compelling of a character to me. So I can understand. Well, no, I can't understand it. Like I'm trying to find the words here. It has always been weird to me that some of the complaints of not only the current MCU, but some of the complaints really dating back to the early days after the first Avengers film, in which it seemed like a lot of the films started to, or pretty much all of the films started to inject a lot more humor into them. It's always been weird to me that people are like, yeah, these films are far funnier now and they're not taking themselves as seriously. And we hate that. But then you come to Deadpool, and Deadpool kind of has all of the hallmarks of almost everything that we hate about MCU's comedy, and their use of humor has it in spades. Most of the jokes are like potty humor. They're childish. There's a lot of them that aren't funny. They hit us over the head with humor. It's a lot of. It feels like a lot of. Dang it, what is his name? Ned? Is that his name? Or no, that don't sound like his name. The kid from off of The Simpsons who he always points at him. Like it kind of always feels like that. Like there's always Deadpool himself or somebody is always pointing at something in the movie and pointing out how funny it is. It also in some ways or in some instances feels like the comedy style of Family Guy, which, let's be honest, especially for we millennials, a lot of Family Guy, it was really, really funny in its earlier seasons. Probably from maybe like the first 4 or 5, maybe even 6 seasons. It was like the show to watch. It was, animated, adult-oriented comedy, and it had some hilarious stuff. Even as a teenager, I was watching, it was like, oh man, this is hilarious. But after that, it just sort of wears on you, and it's just like, okay, now you kind of beating me down because it's led to that. I saw it I read about it in an article. It's a TikTok trend of I guess it's Gen Z, but it might be Gen Alpha too, although they feel too young. But it's the overstimulation comedy. It's where they'll have like a video of a Family Guy clip, and then they'll have another clip just pop up next to it, and then it'll be a third clip and a fourth clip, and then they'll just have like all these different clips that you're supposed to be watching all at once. That weirdly enough feels like Deadpool, to where it's just like they're constantly there's a joke every couple of seconds, not even a joke a minute, and you're either supposed to get it or not, whatever. And I'm like, I don't know if at some point it beats you over the head so much that, in my opinion, it just stops being funny after a while. And that's kind of how I feel about Deadpool. Now, again, I understand why you all, well, no, like I said, I really don't understand why you all like that as opposed to other ones. But I guess I do, because the fans have set their expectations for the character at a particular level. And so the level that you set is that, oh well, you know, Deadpool is one of those characters to where, let's be honest, you can, and I don't do any sort of anything really. I'm very milquetoast when it comes to, well, consuming or putting anything into my body. So I only know this crap because these ads are literally everywhere on X, on the, you know, the X platform formerly known as Twitter. But Deadpool very much seems like one of those film franchises that you can take one of those, what is it, Tommy Chung cruise shoes. If you've been on X, you know exactly the crap that I'm talking about. It feels like you could take one of those or a Snoop Dogg inspired product and just sit there and watch it. It's not really actually funny unless you've been, shall we say, altered. Unless you've altered your state in some way, shape, or form, then it's hilarious. But it's like, I get it because, and only because, we as fans have set our expectations at a certain level. Like, oh, well, Deadpool doesn't take anything seriously anyway. He's out of the comic book phenomenon or idea. He is like the most comedic out of all of the characters. Mind you, that doesn't, that doesn't, for whatever reason, it didn't have the same coverage, I guess, for She-Hulk. I don't know why people thought that She-Hulk was going to be serious when the She-Hulk character also routinely breaks the fourth wall as well. So I'm not sure why that one didn't get the same coverage and the same sort of love that Deadpool gets. But yeah, we don't expect much from Deadpool. And therefore, because we don't expect a whole lot, it's like, yeah, you know, this humor, even though it's some of the same kind of humor that you would see in literally any of the other MCU films, and now since it is going to be a member of the MCU, it's like, okay, well, you know, but it has some of the same humor, and we allow it. Has plenty of childish humor, right? It has plenty of just humor to where it's like, this is just stupid. This is very dumb. In some ways, I feel like, again, we need to go back to reminding ourselves that, yes, even though we may take these characters incredibly seriously, that ultimately these are characters from comic books. So I get this idea of Marvel needs to cut down on the humor, but also there needs to be, it can't be one extreme or the other, in my opinion. I think there needs to be a healthy middle ground somewhere in which we as the fans can also say, okay, yeah, you can have a certain level of humor. Sometimes you can have a certain level of goofy humor, or a certain level of childish humor, a certain level of humor that doesn't even hit. You can have a certain level of all of that. But ultimately, you should treat the character how we want the character to be treated. Yeah, I'm blanking on a few things here because I've been eating all day and I had the itis, so my brain is kind of foggy because man, I was grubbing. It's Easter Sunday, Easter night right now as I'm recording this. So yeah, I think that was all that I wanted to say on Marvel comedy. I really didn't want to. There were certain things that I didn't say because that would just make the video longer, and I have videos talking about comedy in general that are going to cover some of those things. But yeah, I feel like we all know Marvel comedy is just it's a big problem. But where we go from here, it's going to be hard to figure that out. It's going to be hard to figure that out. So I don't have a sign. Hey everybody. So while I don't have an official sign off yet, I guess I should do the whole please like, comment, share, and if you so desire and you want to see more, subscribe. But more importantly, I will ask that you please go and purchase one of my books. They are mostly ebooks and pretty much they are all under $10. See if any of my work is actually any good, if it lives up to any of the things that I'm talking about here on my channel, specifically with the entertainment industry videos. So please go purchase my books. All of my links are down below. Thank you.